Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Mathers, and as most of you will know, I'm the local minister at Shield Hill and Muiravinside. I was blessed by being brought up in a home with a Christian mother. My father certainly wasn't a Christian, but from our earliest, my brother and I were taught to know and love Jesus. I was brought up in a Brethren assembly, and when I was still quite a young teenager, I was accepted into fellowship there and became a Sunday school teacher. After a few years, while still in my teens, I moved to a place known as the Tent Hall in Glasgow, and that was run really on Baptist lines. And I was able to do a bit more of a different type of service for God there. Although one thing I certainly wouldn't do was stand up and speak. No, that wasn't me at all. It was there I met my husband, Danny. We were married in Tent Hall. And then about 3 months later, we left the city and moved to Grangemouth because Danny was a chemist in the industry there. We very soon joined the Church of Scotland. We went to St Andrews in Falkirk, where the minister was the Reverend Robert Pollock, a lovely, godly man. And it was there that Danny felt called to the ministry. He trained at Glasgow University and then was inducted into a church in Grangemouth where we stayed, Charing Cross in West. That was, shall we say, a challenge. The church was very run down, and we were both working our socks off to try and get things going again. I was still working full time at this time, and one morning I was driving to work when I had a road crash. I was driving a small Volkswagen, and I argued with a huge, fully laden tipper truck. Not wise. He had been signalling to turn in where I was going out. I believed him, but of course he went straight on. The first miracle was that I wasn't killed. But I was badly affected by the crash. There had been a bump in the head, but it left me, my speech was all jumbled. I was absolutely incomprehensible. I couldn't read or write, count. I couldn't even follow television or radio. And I couldn't even listen to my beloved classical music. Life was very difficult. But I've got to say that God had me where he wanted me, not running around from one thing to the other, but still before him. There was only one thing I could do. And I remember one afternoon I was in the house on my own. My husband was out in pastoral duties. My sons were at school or at work. And I just sat there and I began to pray. And the first thing I asked God was, why? Why had he allowed this to happen to me? I was needed at the office, but more important than that, I was needed at the church. Why had he allowed this to happen? And on top of that, I had just started some studies with the Scottish Church's Open College. I had felt I wanted to know more deeply the scriptures, and I had enrolled in this purely for my own interest, was thoroughly enjoying it. And, well, I had just started. I wanted to go on with it. To my surprise, God answered me. He spoke to me. And it was the first time I really realized that God speaks to us direct if we are willing to listen. And he told me he had been with me. He had protected me. He was still with me. And he had a task for me to do. He told me I had to preach his word. That rocked me. Don't tell me God doesn't have a sense of humour. Through time, my problems with speech and reading and whatnot cleared up. The only thing that has never cleared up from that accident is my poor memory. Up until then, I'd had a brilliant memory, but since then, I've been plagued with a very bad memory. But God has been with me, and he led me forward day by day. After the crash, I didn't have the confidence to apply for full ministry. So I took the halfway house. I thought I'd be safe and just make sure I'd heard God properly. So I applied to the Church of Scotland to become a lay reader. I was accepted, had some years of study, of course, after I completed the course I'd been doing, and was eventually set apart as a lay reader. To begin with, like all readers, I had a peripatetic ministry, going from church to church as I was needed. But quite quickly, God called me to Shield Hill Church to work there as locum. From there, I went to work at Lauriston and Reading and Westquarter as locum. And it was then that God began to nudge me that when he said ministry, he meant ministry. Being me, I procrastinated again. I've got to be honest. But eventually I got round to applying to the church. Once again, not for the full-time ministry. I felt I didn't have time for that. But for a 4-year course at Glasgow, but I applied for the locally ordained ministry. Obviously, I was accepted. And after more years of study, I was doing a probationary period at Denny Old Church. I left the one Sunday, the minister left the next. He was going to another church. And in the Monday morning at 10 o'clock, I had a phone call. Would I come back to them as their locum, which I did. Then Hags was added on. It was linked with Denny Old. And that was where I was ordained into these 2 charges. I was there for several years until I had to leave because of my husband's illness. I needed to be at home to nurse him. Shortly after he died, the interim moderator for Shield Hill and Miravinside phoned me. Would I consider coming as locum there? I said no at that time, I wasn't ready, but she came back a few months later. And this time I said yes. Recently, there have been some health problems for me, and I had considered giving up. I prayed about it and said, God, you've got to make this clear to me what I've got to do. I went to bed and fell asleep. And about 2 or 3 in the morning, I wakened. I was wide awake. And I heard a voice say to me, tell them about Jesus. Being me, I argued, Lord, are you sure? You know the problems I've got. Are you sure about this? I went back to sleep. And a couple of hours later, I wakened again. And the same voice said to me, the same words, tell them about Jesus. Even I couldn't argue this time. I don't know what lies ahead for me, for the church, for any of us. But what I do know is that God knows, and He is with us, and He is going ahead of us, preparing the way. And when we trust Him and follow Him, He will lead us into what He has for us. And we can trust Him implicitly.